There is a clay tablet preserved in the British Museum in London. It measures just over 12 centimeters. It was created in Babylon about 2,600 years ago. Engraved on its surface is the oldest map of the world that we know of. Scholars call this artifact the Imago Mundi, which simply means image of the world. But here is the fascinating part. When researchers deciphered the inscriptions surrounding the map, they found references to distant mountains, a great flood, and a river flowing through the center of everything. That river is the Euphrates, the very same river mentioned in the second chapter of Genesis. A pagan civilization, 600 years before Christ, drew the world and placed at its center the same river that the Bible places at the heart of Eden. That raises a question many people are reluctant to ask out loud. Are the places described in Genesis real places? Can you point to them on a map? Can you buy a plane ticket and stand where they once stood? In most cases, the answer is yes. And that is exactly what this documentary will do. We will visit 7 locations mentioned in the book of Genesis, one by one, and show you where each of them is believed to be today, based on the research of archaeologists, geographers, and historians. Some have locations that are almost certain. Others remain the subject of intense debate, but every one of them has left traces behind. Our journey begins where everything began. The book of Genesis does not describe Eden as a dream or a symbolic place beyond reality. Instead, it describes Eden as though it were giving directions, using rivers, neighboring lands, and recognizable landmarks. Listen carefully. A river flowed out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it divided and became 4 headwaters. The name of the first is Pishon. It is the one that flows around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. The name of the second river is Gihon. It is the one that flows around the whole land of Cush. The name of the third river is the Tigris, which runs east of Assyria, and the fourth river is the Euphrates. Genesis 2:10-14. Pause for a moment and notice something remarkable. The passage mentions gold, precious stones, and even Assyria, a real empire that archaeologists have excavated and historians have documented. This is not the language of mythology. It is the language of geography. Of the 4 rivers named in Genesis, 2 still exist today, the Tigris and the Euphrates. They continue to flow through Turkey, Syria, and Iraq before joining together near the Persian Gulf. Anyone can find them on a modern map. That immediately narrows the search. If Eden was connected to these rivers, then it must have been somewhere in Mesopotamia, the region that largely corresponds to modern-day Iraq. The mystery lies with the other 2 rivers, Pishon and Gihon, which no longer appear on any map. That is where modern archaeology enters the story. During the 1980s, archaeologist Juris Zarin studied satellite imagery of Iraq, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. Hidden beneath the desert, he identified the dry channel of an enormous ancient river known today as Wadi al-Batin. It flowed from a region famous for ancient gold mines toward the place where the Tigris and Euphrates meet. Zarin's asked a simple but fascinating question. What if this vanished river was the biblical Pishon? I even propose that the Garden of Eden may now lie beneath the waters of the Persian Gulf, submerged when sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age. Another theory, championed by British researcher David Roll, points in the opposite direction. He argues that Eden was located farther north, near modern-day Tabriz in Iran, where ancient place names and river systems appear to match the Genesis account. So which theory is correct? The honest answer is that no one knows for certain. But here is what nearly all serious researchers agree on, and this is what truly matters. Every credible proposal points to the same general region, not Europe, not the Americas, but the Middle East, the land stretching from the mountains of Turkey and Iran down to the Persian Gulf. Thousands of years ago, Genesis placed Eden there. And despite satellites, archaeology, and decades of research, modern investigators continue to search that very same landscape. There is one final clue. Southern Iraq, where the Tigris and Euphrates meet, is home to some of the oldest cities ever discovered, including Eridu, Uruk, and Ur. Even the ancient Sumerians preserve stories of a paradise-like land called Dilmun, a place without sickness or death. Different civilizations, different beliefs, yet all pointed toward the same corner of the world when speaking about humanity's beginning. And from that cradle of civilization, our journey now moves to another place in Genesis, one that rises thousands of meters above the earth and has fascinated explorers for centuries. The second place on our list has something Eden does not: a towering mountain visible from more than 100 kilometers away. After 150 days of floodwaters covering the earth, Genesis records the moment when Noah's Ark finally came to rest. And in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Genesis 8:4. Notice an important detail. The Bible does not say Mount Ararat, singular. It says the mountains of Ararat. In the ancient world, Ararat referred to an entire region, later known as the Kingdom of Urartu, a civilization whose fortresses and cities have been uncovered across eastern Turkey and Armenia. Within that region stands one mountain above all the others, a dormant volcano rising 5,137 meters above sea level, snow-covered throughout the year. Today it is known around the world as Mount Ararat. For nearly 2,000 years, local tradition has identified this mountain as the resting place of Noah's Ark. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus even wrote that people in his day claimed to preserve pieces of the ark as sacred relics. Over the past 2 centuries, explorers, scientists, and filmmakers have repeatedly searched the mountain. Pilots reported mysterious shapes trapped in the glacier. Satellite images revealed what became known as the Ararat anomaly. About 30 kilometers away, the boat-shaped Durapanar site has also fueled decades of debate. Some researchers believe it is a natural formation, while others argue that underground surveys reveal evidence of a man-made structure. So far, no discovery has been universally accepted as Noah's Ark. But one fact is beyond dispute. The mountains of Ararat described in Genesis are a real place. Anyone can visit them today in eastern Turkey, where the snow-covered peak still dominates the landscape. There is one more remarkable detail. Mount Ararat stands near the meeting point of Europe, Asia, and Africa. From its surrounding valleys, roots naturally spread toward all 3 continents. If one family were to repopulate the world after the flood, it would be difficult to imagine a more strategic starting point. Genesis places humanity's new beginning at one of the greatest natural crossroads on Earth. Some see that as divine design, others call it coincidence. Either way, our journey is only beginning. Because from the mountains of Ararat, the story now follows humanity as it descends into the plains of Shinar, where another monument would rise, not to preserve life, but to challenge heaven itself. From the frozen mountains where humanity began again, people descended into a broad plain, and on that plain, they launched the first great act of collective rebellion. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. Genesis 11:2, Shinar. This name appears repeatedly in the Bible, always referring to the same place, southern Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, in what is now modern-day Iraq. Genesis tells us that the people there learned to make kiln-fired bricks and bind them together with bitumen. Using this new technology, they decided to build a city and a tower that would reach the heavens, making a name for themselves. Archaeology reveals something remarkable. Across southern Iraq stand the ruins of massive ziggurats, stepped towers built with the very same materials described in Genesis. Ancient texts explain that these structures were intended to connect heaven and earth. Among them, one stands above all the rest. In the ruins of ancient Babylon lies the foundation of Etemenanki, whose name means House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth. It was rebuilt by Nebuchadnezzar II. Yet even the Babylonians believed they were restoring a far older tower. The structure measured about 91 meters in both height and width, one of the tallest monuments of the ancient world. Some scholars argue that an even older candidate exists at Eridu, the earliest Sumerian city, where another unfinished ziggurat still stands. The debate continues, but one fact is undisputed. Every serious proposal places the Tower of Babel on the same plane of Shinar. Today, visitors to Babylon can still stand beside the excavated foundation of Etemenanki. The tower itself has vanished, leaving behind only a flooded square platform, a silent reminder of humanity's greatest attempt to reach heaven through its own strength. At this point, notice something important. We have now visited 3 places: Eden, Ararat, Shinar. Though they belong to different chapters of Genesis, they all lie within the same region of the world. The rivers of Eden flow through Iraq. Ararat rises where those rivers begin, and Shinar stretches across the plain where they unite before reaching the sea. The Bible unfolds across one continuous landscape rather than jumping from one continent to another. At the same time, honesty matters. Some conclusions are established facts. Others remain well-supported hypotheses. The Euphrates River exists. The ruins of Babylon exist. But the exact location of Eden and the identity of Noah's Ark are still subjects of ongoing debate. Faith does not require exaggeration. What archaeology has already confirmed is remarkable enough. There is also a deeper pattern hidden in the geography. In Eden, God planted a garden. Humanity fell. At Ararat, God gave humanity a new beginning. Then, in Shinar, people came down from the mountain and tried to build their own way back to heaven, without God. The geography of Genesis is more than a map. It is the story of God's grace reaching down while humanity continually tries to climb upward on its own. And that pattern still speaks today. Every one of us has built our own Tower of Babel, through ambition, success, reputation, or self-reliance. The plain of Shinar may be in Iraq, but its spirit can still be found in the human heart. And that ancient foundation raises the same question today. What happens to the towers we build for ourselves? Because from here, the story changes. Genesis narrows its focus from all humanity to one man, Abraham. The remaining places on our journey will follow his footsteps. The great city he left behind, the place where he waited, the valley consumed by judgment, and the mountain where faith would be tested like never before. Our journey is only halfway complete. The most personal chapter is about to begin. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram. Together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. Genesis 11:31. For centuries, readers of the Bible spoke the name Ur of the Chaldeans without having the slightest idea where it was located. Some ancient maps guessed it was somewhere in Syria. Others did not even attempt to identify its location. Ur was simply a name on a page. That changed forever between 1922 and 1934. During 12 excavation seasons, British archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley, leading a joint expedition from the British Museum and the University of Pennsylvania, excavated a large mound of ruins in southern Iraq known as Tel El Makayr, an Arabic name meaning roughly the Mound of Bitumen. Even the local name was a clue: bitumen, the very same natural asphalt used in the bricks of Babel. Beneath that mound, Woolley uncovered an entire city. The inscriptions found at the site confirmed its identity. Written into clay thousands of years ago was the name Ur. Its modern location is known with remarkable precision. The ruins of Ur lie in Tikar province, southern Iraq, about 10 miles from the modern city of Nasiriyah, and roughly 365 miles south of Baghdad. Anyone flying over the region can immediately recognize its most famous landmark, the Great Ziggurat of Ur. This massive step tower has a base measuring approximately 64 by 45 meters and was built around 100 BC by King Ur-Nammu. Much of its facade was restored during the 20th century. Its monumental staircase remains so impressive that visitors and soldiers still climb it today to look out across the surrounding desert. In March 2021, Pope Francis held an interfaith gathering on that very plain of Ur because it is traditionally recognized as the birthplace of Abraham. But what Woolley's excavations revealed about life in this city completely changes the way we read Genesis. Ur was not a small village. At the time, Abraham is traditionally believed to have lived around 2000 BC. Ur was one of the largest cities on Earth, with an estimated population reaching tens of thousands. Woolley excavated residential neighborhoods filled with two-story homes built around central courtyards, complete with drainage systems. He discovered school tablets on which students practiced multiplication tables and writing exercises, complete with corrections written by their teachers. Perhaps the oldest homework ever discovered, he uncovered commercial records showing that ships from Ur traded with distant lands, transporting copper, ivory, gold, and precious stones across the Persian Gulf. Courts, contracts, receipts, an entire bureaucracy operating through clay tablets. But he also uncovered the city's darker side. In what became known as the Royal Cemetery of Ur, Woolley excavated the tombs of kings and queens buried alongside magnificent gold treasures that now fill entire galleries in the British Museum and the Penn Museum in Philadelphia. The Standard of Ur. golden helmets, lyres decorated with magnificent bulls' heads. Yet surrounding the royal burials, Woolley found dozens of additional skeletons. Soldiers, servants, ladies of the royal court, people buried alongside their rulers. Abraham's city practiced human retainer burials. At the center of the city's religious life stood the great ziggurat dedicated to Nana, the moon god. Around it revolved a calendar of religious festivals, priests, sacrifices, and ceremonies that governed every aspect of daily life. Now put all the pieces together. The book of Joshua provides a family detail that perfectly fits this archaeological picture. Long ago, your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and served other gods. Joshua 24:2. The Bible itself openly acknowledges it. Abraham's family worshipped other gods. Abraham was not born into a household of believers surrounded by a pagan world. He was born within paganism itself, inside a wealthy, sophisticated, comfortable metropolis where the worship of the moon god shaped the entire culture. It was from that very place that God called him. And archaeology allows us to understand the true magnitude of what Abraham gave up. He exchanged a 2-story house with a private courtyard for a tent made of goat skins. He exchanged the security of city walls for an open road. He exchanged the most advanced city of his world for a promise without a destination. It is also worth noting that there is an honest scholarly debate on this point. Some researchers argue that Abraham's Ur may have been a different city, another Ur farther north, near Haran, in what is now Turkey. Their argument is based on the fact that Genesis refers to the city as Ur of the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans, however, do not appear in historical records until many centuries later. The most widely accepted explanation is that the phrase of the Chaldeans was added later as a clarification for future readers. Much like saying Sao Paulo dos Bandeirantes, even though the Bandeirantes no longer exist. For this reason, the majority of scholars, along with centuries of tradition, continue to identify Abraham's Ur with Tel El Mukayyar in southern Iraq, where the great ziggurat still casts its shadow across the plain. From there, the caravan of Terah and Abraham traveled northwest along the Euphrates River and stopped in a city whose name the biblical text itself speaks with the weight of a necessary pause. And they came to Haran and settled there. Genesis 11:31, just 4 words. And they settled there. Yet within those 4 words are years of history. The family left Ur intending to reach Canaan. Instead, they stopped halfway. Genesis tells us that Terah, Abraham's father, died in Haran at the age of 205. Only after his father's death did Abraham, at the age of 75, hear God's call once again and continue his journey. So where is Haran? This is one of the easiest answers on our entire list. For one remarkable reason, Haran never disappeared. The city still exists today. People still live there. It is located in southeastern Turkey, in Şanlıurfa province, about 44 kilometers from the nearest major city and only a short distance from the Syrian border. Today, the district is spelled Haran in Turkish, essentially the same name, a name that has survived nearly 4,000 years with almost no change. Ancient Mesopotamian documents already mention the city in the archives of Ebla and Mari, dating back to the 3rd and 2nd millennia BC. Those records describe Haran as a major caravan crossroads where the trade routes connecting Babylon with the Mediterranean intersected with the roads descending from Anatolia. Pause and think about that for a moment. Abraham's family, traveling between the ancient world they had left behind and the promise they had not yet seen, spent years in a city whose very identity was that of a crossroads. There are details in the Bible that almost seem intentionally placed. And historians point out another detail that is even more revealing. Can you guess who the chief deity of Haran was? The very same god worshipped in Ur, Sin, also known as Nana, the moon god. Haran was home to one of the most famous temples dedicated to the moon god in the entire ancient Near East, the Ehulhul Temple, restored repeatedly by the kings of Assyria and Babylon over the centuries. In other words, when Terah's family settled in Haran, they did not settle in neutral territory. They settled in another branch of the very same religious system they had left behind in Ur. They left one city devoted to the moon god only to settle in another. They traveled more than 1,000 kilometers. Yet spiritually, they had never really left. Some scholars see this as a portrait of partial obedience. The family responded to God's call to leave, but they stopped where life still felt familiar. and there they remained until Terah died. Archaeology has carried out extensive work at Haran. Excavations conducted by Turkish and British teams throughout the 20th century and continued in recent decades by local universities have uncovered occupation layers dating back to the Bronze Age, the period traditionally associated with the biblical patriarchs. Visitors can still see the ruins of what is considered one of the oldest universities in the Islamic world, along with the remains of city walls, a medieval castle, and a square minaret that rises above the surrounding plain. Surrounding the ancient ruins stands the iconic image of modern Haran. Its famous beehive houses, cone-shaped homes built from mud bricks using a construction technique that has helped residents endure the region's intense heat for thousands of years. Tourists visit these remarkable homes every day. Haran is one of the very few cities mentioned in Genesis where a local resident can still welcome you with a cup of tea before you continue your journey. The Bible also connects Haran to the rest of its story through a detail many people overlook. It was to Haran that Abraham sent his servant to find a wife for Isaac. From Haran came Rebekah. It was to Haran that Jacob fled from the anger of Esau. There he served Laban for 20 years. There he married Leah and Rachel. And there 11 of his 12 sons were born. In practical terms, the 12 tribes of Israel began in the land of Haran. The city of waiting became the birthplace of an entire nation. In fact, if this journey is changing the way you see stories you may have read since childhood, take a moment to subscribe to the channel before we continue. Not because of the numbers, but for a practical reason. The upcoming episodes will explore the places of the Exodus, the wilderness, and the kings of Israel, using this same approach, one location at a time, one archaeological study at a time. Subscribing is the easiest way to make sure these episodes find you when they are released. Because now the journey turns south. It descends from Turkey to the lowest valley on the face of the earth. And at the bottom of that valley, beneath a layer of ash, two names are waiting for us. Then the Lord rained sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven upon Sodom and Gomorrah. And he overthrew those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and everything that grew on the ground. Genesis 19:24-25. Of the 7 locations on our list, this is the only one that the biblical text explicitly says was destroyed. We search for the other 6, expecting to find them. We search for this one knowing that the correct answer may be nothing at all. And yet, or perhaps because of that, few places in the Bible have inspired as many excavations, scientific studies, and academic debates as Sodom and Gomorrah. Let us begin with the search area. Genesis provides remarkably clear geographical clues. The cities were located in the plain of the Jordan, the region that Lot chose because it was well watered, like the garden of the Lord before its destruction. This plain lies where the Jordan River flows into the Dead Sea, along the modern border between Israel and Jordan. It is the lowest point on the Earth's land surface, more than 420 meters below sea level. A geological rift where the land literally sinks between 2 tectonic plates, and where the underground is rich in bitumen, sulfur, salt, and natural gas. Interestingly, the biblical text recorded this geological feature long before geology became a science. Genesis 14:10 describes the Valley of Sidon as being full of bitumen pits. The geography of the story matches the geology of the land. Within this valley, 2 leading archaeological candidates compete for the title of Sodom. The first lies on the southeastern shore of the Dead Sea in Jordan, at a site called Bab Adh-Dra. Excavated beginning in 1965, archaeologists uncovered a Bronze Age city surrounded by an enormous cemetery containing tens of thousands of burials. One discovery immediately drew attention: a destruction layer caused by intense fire. Buildings burned from the top downward, as though the flames had started on their roofs. Nearby, a second site called Moriah displays the same pattern of burning and abandonment at roughly the same period. 2 neighboring cities, destroyed together, never occupied again. Some scholars believe these sites represent Sodom and Gomorrah. The second major candidate lies northeast of the Dead Sea, also in Jordan. In recent years, it has attracted worldwide attention. The site is known as Tal el-Hammam, excavated since 2005 by a joint team of American universities and Jordan's Department of Antiquities. Tal el-Hammam proved to be the largest Bronze Age city in the entire region. A powerful city protected by massive defensive walls, several meters thick, overlooking the Jordan Valley, exactly where Genesis says, Lot settled. In 2021, a team of more than 20 researchers published a study in the scientific journal Scientific Reports describing what they found within the city's destruction layer. Pottery melted into glass, mud bricks with bubbled surfaces, quartz crystals showing evidence of high-impact shock. According to the study, these materials would have required temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, far hotter than an ordinary fire could produce. The researchers proposed that the city was destroyed around 1650 BC by the explosion of a celestial object in the atmosphere, an event similar to the 1908 Tunguska explosion in Siberia, a stone from the sky exploding above the valley, producing furnace-like temperatures and a shockwave powerful enough to shear off the upper portions of city walls. Now, as always, honesty comes first. The Tal el-Hammam study remains controversial. Other scientists have challenged its dating, questioned the interpretation of the materials, and disputed the airburst hypothesis itself. The debate remains active. Tal el-Hammam may be Sodom, Bab el-Dura may be Sodom, or perhaps the cities lie beneath the shallow southern waters of the Dead Sea, as other researchers suggest, buried beneath layers of salt. But notice what remains true after the dust of the debate settles. Every serious candidate lies within the same valley identified by Genesis. Every candidate shows evidence of catastrophic destruction involving extreme heat. Every candidate was abandoned and never rebuilt, despite occupying one of the most valuable valleys in the region. And the memory of this catastrophe survived far beyond the pages of the Bible. Greek and Roman writers such as Strabo and Tacitus describe the Dead Sea region as a burned land where great cities had once stood. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus wrote that in his own day, traces of those cities could still be seen across the landscape. That is independent historical testimony outside the biblical record. And then there is one final silent monument. On the southwestern shore of the Dead Sea rises Mount Sodom, a ridge stretching nearly 7 miles in length, composed almost entirely of rock salt. The wind and rain have carved towering pillars out of the salt, formations that rise and collapse over the course of decades. One of these pillars, which still stands today, has been given the name Lot's Wife by local residents and tour guides. People stop, take photographs, and continue on their journey. Most never realize that they are standing before the perfect summary of this place. In the valley where everything else was erased, what remained was a warning. 18 centuries after the destruction, Jesus summarized that warning in just 3 words, the shortest reference he ever made to the Old Testament. Remember Lot's wife. Luke 17:32. From the lowest valley on earth, our journey now climbs upward. It leads to a mountain that appears in Genesis during one of the most difficult chapters in the entire Bible. Unlike every other place on this journey, it is remembered not for destruction, but for a promise. And he said, "Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I shall tell you." Genesis 22:2, the land of Moriah, a 3-day journey south from where Abraham was living. An old man over 100 years of age, a young son, 2 servants, a donkey, and a bundle of firewood. Every reader of the Bible knows what happened on the summit of that mountain, the altar. The raised knife, the voice that stopped Abraham, the ram caught by its horns in the thicket. But the question this documentary asks is different. Where is that mountain today? And the answer may be the most remarkable of all 7 locations, because the Bible itself identifies it by name, city, and exact location. Nearly 1,000 years after Abraham, the 2nd book of Chronicles records the moment when Solomon began building the temple in Jerusalem. The wording is remarkably precise. Then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to David his father, at the place that David had prepared on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. 2 Chronicles 3:1. Mount Moriah is the Temple Mount. The place where Abraham bound Isaac is the very place where, centuries later, Israel's altar stood. The Holy of Holies, the spiritual center of an entire nation. And this place has not been lost. It is perhaps the most famous, most photographed, most contested, and most heavily guarded piece of land on earth. The great platform at the heart of Jerusalem's Old City. An area of approximately 14 hectares, known to Jews as the Temple Mount and to Muslims as the Noble Sanctuary. At the highest point of the platform stands the Dome of the Rock, built in AD 691. Its golden dome appears in nearly every photograph of Jerusalem. Beneath that dome lies the exposed bedrock at the summit of Mount Moriah, the very rock that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam each associate in different ways with Abraham's sacrifice. For obvious political and religious reasons, archaeologists cannot excavate beneath the Temple Mount. Any excavation there could ignite an international crisis. Yet during the past 150 years, archaeological work surrounding the site has mapped the mountain in extraordinary detail. Researchers have uncovered the massive retaining walls built by Herod the Great, including the famous Western Wall, which is simply the western retaining wall of the temple platform. They have excavated first-century streets buried beneath the rubble left by the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. Enormous stones weighing dozens of tons still lie exactly where Titus's soldiers threw them nearly 2,000 years ago. The mountain of Genesis 22 has a real address, a postal code, and a line of visitors every single day. But what truly brings our journey to its conclusion is not its location. It is what Abraham said on that mountain after the ram died in place of his son. He gave that place a name, and the name did not look backward at what had just happened. It looked forward. So Abraham called the name of that place, "The Lord will provide," as it is said to this day, "On the mountain of the Lord it shall be provided." Genesis 22:14. Because Mount Moriah is not an isolated peak. It is a long mountain ridge stretching across Jerusalem. On one part of that ridge stood the temple, and farther along that same ridge, outside the city walls, nearly 2,000 years after Abraham, another father gave another son. He climbed the mountain carrying his own wood upon his back, just as Isaac had carried the wood for the sacrifice. But this time, no voice stopped the sacrifice at the final moment. The lamb whom God himself would provide, as Abraham had told his son on the journey, was offered completely. 7 places. And the 7th does not end with ruins, or ashes, or an unfinished tower. It ends with provision. The only location on this list whose very name is a promise is the place where that promise was ultimately fulfilled. We have reached the end of our journey, and now I want to speak with you one more time, face to face. Because while preparing this episode, I realized something I cannot keep to myself. We have visited 7 places, and I want you to notice the condition in which each of them has reached us today. Because together, they tell a story within the story. Eden is inaccessible, perhaps hidden beneath the sea, its entrance closed ever since the fall, exactly as the biblical text describes. Babel is nothing more than a flooded foundation in the heart of Iraq, the unfinished monument to humanity's attempt to reach heaven without God. Sodom and Gomorrah survive only as layers of ash and melted pottery, debated in scientific journals. The physical record of judgment. Do you see the pattern? The places associated with humanity's rebellion have reached us as ruins, empty spaces, and scars. Now look at the others. Ararat still rises high above the landscape, a snow-covered giant visible from more than 100 kilometers away. The natural monument to a new beginning. Haran is still alive, with people drinking tea inside its ancient mud brick homes. A reminder that the journey of faith is still being walked. And Moriah has become the most visited and most contested piece of land on earth, where millions of people pray every year. The places connected with God's promises are still alive. I don't know about you, but I find it hard to believe that all of this is merely a coincidence. The very landscape of the Middle East preaches a sermon. What humanity builds against God eventually becomes ruins. What God promises remains standing for thousands of years. Now let me bring this closer to your own life. Because a beautiful documentary that never moves from the map to the human heart is nothing more than tourism. I want to leave you with 3 practical lessons these 7 places teach us. And I invite you to test each one in your own life. First, God works through real places, not abstract ideas. Biblical faith does not unfold in a fantasy world. It unfolds in excavated cities, along rivers with real names, on hills with real coordinates. That also means God works where you are. In your home, at your workplace, on your street. You do not have to wait until life feels spiritually perfect before God can work. Ur was deeply pagan, yet it was there that God called Abraham. The place where you are right now, with all its problems, is still a place where God speaks. The question is not where you are. The question is whether you are listening. Second, be careful of your Haran. Everyone has one. Haran is the place where obedience stops halfway. You know where God is calling you. You have already left your old life behind, but somewhere along the journey, you settled into a place that is comfortable enough to stay, different enough to make you feel as though you have changed, similar enough that it never truly costs you anything. Perhaps it is a relationship you know needs healing, a habit you know you should leave behind, a decision you have postponed for years. Abraham's family remained in Haran until Terah died. Time stood still in the city called the Crossroads. So let me ask you one quiet question. Answer it only in your own heart. What is your Haran? Where did your walk with God stop? Where did you begin calling a stopping place your final destination? Third, Moriah teaches us that the hardest climb of your life may become the place of God's greatest provision. Abraham climbed that mountain believing he was about to lose everything. He came down with his son alive, God's promise renewed, and a new name written into history. The Lord will provide. Many people listening right now are climbing a mountain of their own. A difficult diagnosis, unemployment, a child walking the wrong path, a grief that still has not healed. The seventh place on our journey teaches this lesson. You cannot know what God has already prepared on the mountaintop while you are still halfway up the hill. The ram was already caught in the thicket before Abraham ever arrived. God's provision waits on the mountain, not in the valley. Keep climbing. And my God will supply all your needs according to his riches and glory in Christ Jesus. Philippians 4:19.